Vice-Chancellor, Pro-Vice-Chancellor. The name Kitty Hart-Moxon sounds quintessentially English. Although she has lived here since 1946, Mrs. Hart-Moxon's early life certainly was not that of a classic English rose. She was born in 1926 as Kitty Felix in the town of Bielsko in the south of Poland, where Jews, Czechs, Poles and Germans mixed. She recalls a blissful childhood with her brother Robert, hiking in the mountains in summer and skiing in winter. At the age of 13, she represented Poland as part of the youth swimming team. The youngest on the squad, she won a bronze medal. But this was her first intimation of anti-Semitism, as some of the crowd threw stones at the Jewish competitors. It was 1939, and her parents decided to move the family from Bielsko because of its proximity to the borders with Czechoslovakia and Germany. They went to Lublin in central Poland, but within weeks the German army invaded Poland and marched into Lublin. Gradually, a ghetto was created for Jews, and life became increasingly difficult. The family attempted to escape several times, but were unsuccessful. Her father obtained false non-Jewish documents for them, and they split up to enhance their chances of survival. Kitty and her mother, posing as Polish forced labourers, were smuggled onto a train bound for Germany. They started work at a factory, but Mrs. Hart-Moxon and her mother, along with 12 other Jews, were betrayed, imprisoned, and sentenced to death by firing squad. They were prepared to die, but it turned out to be a mock execution, a piece of Nazi cruelty. The guards fired shots into the air. Instead, they were sentenced to life imprisonment in Auschwitz. Kitty Hart-Moxon, then aged 16, and her mother arrived in Auschwitz in April 1943. The majority of prisoners lived only for 4 to 6 weeks. Kitty had the good fortune, if such a phrase can ever be attached to life in Auschwitz, of obtaining indoor work. Amongst other jobs, she spent 8 months sorting the belongings of new arrivals. Anyone who has visited Auschwitz will have seen the displays of shoes, clothes, artificial limbs, and shuddered at their meaning. Even worse was that this job was next to the gas chambers and crematoria. Mrs. Hart-Moxon witnessed relentless killing from April to November 1944, when the greatest number of victims were murdered. In an interview in the Guardian newspaper in 2010, she said, "It's been said that 1.5 million died. We who were there say it was in excess of 2.5 million. Our brains could simply not accept what we were witnessing, but it was happening." In 1944, Kitty Hart-Moxon's mother was one of 100 people selected to leave the camp. She pleaded for her daughter to accompany her. They were put in cattle trucks and transferred to Gross-Rosen concentration camp. From there, they were marched on a daily basis to work in the Philips electronic factory. In February 1945, they were forced on a 2-week death march over the Sudeten Mountains without food or shelter, before being put onto open coal trucks and taken 1,000 kilometres across Europe to work in an underground factory in northwest Germany, using the skills learned in the Philips factory. Only about 200 people survived the journey from the original 10,000 who had set out. In the spring of 1945, the Allies were close, and Kitty and her mother were again evacuated, this time to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. From there, they were put inside a sealed cattle truck. The train was abandoned, and they were left to die, which most did. Kitty and her mother were 2 of only 12 survivors. Eventually, the door was opened by 3 German soldiers who, rather than shooting them as expected, instead took them to a nearby camp outside Salzwedel. On the 14th of April 1945, the camp was liberated by American troops. They soon discovered that they were the only survivors from their family. Mr. Felix had been shot by the Gestapo, her brother had been killed in battle, and the remaining relatives had died in concentration camps. For a year and a half, Mrs. Hart-Moxon and her mother worked as translators, initially for the British Army and then for the Quaker Relief Team. Her mother also taught English. This work meant that they were granted permits to settle in Britain. They came to Birmingham, as her uncle was living here. In 1949, she married Rudy Hart, who had escaped to England prior to the Holocaust. They had 2 sons, David and Peter. Despite having no formal education from the age of 12, Mrs. Hart-Moxon qualified as a radiographer and worked for many years in the Children's Hospital in Birmingham. The post-war period was particularly difficult. People either did not want to hear her story or frankly disbelieved it. Kitty Hart-Moxon felt that having witnessed such evil, she had a duty to speak out and educate people of the consequences of intolerance, racism, and hatred. In 1961, she published her first book, I Am Alive, an account of her life in Auschwitz. Mrs. Hart-Moxon has been the subject of 3 television documentaries about her story. In 1979, an award-winning Yorkshire television programme, Kitty Returned to Auschwitz, was made about her return to the camp, accompanied by her elder son. This led to the publication of her second book, Return to Auschwitz, in 1981. In 1994, Channel 4 made Another Journey by Train, which followed a group of Nazis and Holocaust deniers meeting Kitty at Auschwitz for a guided tour, during which she tried to tell them of her experiences there. In 2002, the BBC made a programme, Death March, A Survivor's Story, which retraced her experiences in the 6 months prior to liberation. She has also provided filmed testimony for the Imperial War Museum. Kitty Hart-Moxon has spoken extensively in schools to educate young people. Every year, she lectures first-year students at this university who are studying the Holocaust, and unsurprisingly, the students rate it as the high point of the module. Her inspiration has led to many essays and dissertations on her story, and she has been the subject of a PhD thesis. Her willingness to answer questions from students appears to be never-ending. Mrs. Hart-Moxon has spoken all over the world at conferences and commemorative events. She is a trustee of the Holocaust Educational Trust. She works with the Holocaust Centre in Nottinghamshire and in 2003 was awarded the OBE for services relating to Holocaust education. It is a mark of the woman she is that Kitty Hart-Moxon did not allow her terrible experiences to destroy her, but rather, through her resilience and the triumph of the human spirit, she has done all she can in life to educate others in the consequences of intolerance, racism, and hatred. Vice-Chancellor, to you and to the university, I present Kitty Hart-Moxon, OBE, deemed worthy of admission to the degree of Doctor of the University, honoris causa.
By virtue of my authority as Vice-Chancellor, it's my privilege to confer upon you the degree of Doctor of University, honoris causa. Thank you very much.
The Vice-Chancellor, Pro-Vice-Chancellor, graduates, graduands, and guests. I'm immensely honoured to receive this prestigious award And I would like to thank the University Senate and Dr. Isabel Wollaston, who nominated me for this award. My connections with the university are long-standing. I have worked in Edgbaston professionally over many years in our medical practice with my late husband, who lectured in neuroradiology at the Faculty of Medicine. My elder son, David, is a graduate of the Birmingham Medical School. My personal connections with the university date back to 1970, long before I was invited to lecture here. Then, I worked with members of the Student Union to develop a Holocaust traveling exhibition. I used this in schools and colleges at a time when there was no formal Holocaust education in this country. I was not as fortunate as students are today. When I arrived in Birmingham in 1946, I was desperate to study at the university. But this was not possible because I could not get any financial support. As a refugee, at that time, I was not entitled to welfare benefits or grants. Restrictions were imposed on the occupations I was allowed to follow. Yet, I had to earn a living. I was destitute and homeless. I was about to return to the displaced persons camp in Germany when I unexpectedly received an offer from a complete stranger who gave me the opportunity to study for a professional qualification in radiography. Now, this was not my choice of career, but I was extremely grateful because there was no alternative. It was devastating that, having gained my freedom, I was prevented from making any decisions on my future. A huge disappointment was the indifference, the lack of understanding, and the unwillingness of people to listen to what I, a survivor of 4 prisons and 7 concentration camps, had to say. I made a commitment. Particularly as I realized from the day I was rescued and set free that it was my duty and responsibility as a witness, an eyewitness to the greatest crimes in human history, to speak out, in the hope that some lessons may be learned from the horrific events that I had experienced. I made a commitment that part of my life would be devoted to teaching about the consequences of racism and prejudice. Now, my university was called Auschwitz. The constant struggle for survival was a very special education. Each day I managed to stay alive was an achievement and a gift. The whole daily routine was strictly controlled by others, especially the 3 vital elements to sustain life: food and water, a place to sleep, the ability to use the toilets. By the age of 15, I learned that to survive for any length of time in a place designed for death, you had to have strong friendships and mutual support. There were numerous occasions when sacrifices, risks, and critical decisions had to be made, usually placing me in grave danger. Obviously, I would not recommend Auschwitz as an educational institution. Today, people are aware how important it is to understand the past events. We have made huge strides in Holocaust education. There are excellent courses available to students and teachers here at Birmingham and across the UK. Many run by the Holocaust Educational Trust. These courses include our unique Lessons from Auschwitz project. when two students from every school and college in England, Scotland, and Wales have the opportunity to see firsthand the Nazi death camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau. There, they come face to face with the consequences of hatred. They are encouraged to reflect on the meaning of Auschwitz, explore the contemporary relevance of the Holocaust, and learn what can happen when racism and prejudice is left unchecked. The trust also ensures that teachers and students across the UK have the possibility to hear first-hand testimony of Holocaust survivors like myself. But we're not going to be here forever, and we need to think of the future. We hope that new generations, new graduates, who may have participated in our courses, would wish to make a contribution to Holocaust education. They can ensure that this period in history is never forgotten. Finally, my advice to you new graduates is never give up on what you set out to achieve. Yet, you must be prepared to compromise and accept changes, as I had to do. It is not always possible to achieve the exact goals you set for yourselves. Learn from history. Celebrate your success, but remind yourselves how privileged you were to study at this great university. And never cease to be grateful to be living in a society where you've got every opportunity and your freedom and the freedom to determine your own future. Thank you.